Well, from a personal perspective, my life's changed quite a lot since the beginning of COVID, just from the way that I look at things. I was never the sort of person to necessarily stick my head above the parapet or get involved in committees and bureaucracy and red tape and that type of thing. That was for other people to get involved in. I was no real interest. I just wanted to get on with the job that I was doing. But when COVID hit, as the weeks progressed, I just became more and more upset about the way that we were being treated. I mean, at the beginning, they shut all the satellite courts and they had the hub courts. And that meant that our custody business was being dealt with in Edinburgh. And in the first few weeks after the first lockdown in March last year, you would be going into Edinburgh Sheriff Court and you couldn't get moved for lawyers. You were in a room with 15, sometimes 20 lawyers, shoulder to shoulder, social distancing impossible. This was before even the stickers went down on the ground and the posters went up on the walls. No masks, no protective measures at all, really. And we were all just milling about, waiting on papers, the eternal waiting papers. Going down, I mean, anybody who knows the cells at Edinburgh Sheriff Court knows that once you get down there, you're in a cupboard, essentially. It's 6 foot by 6 foot, pretty much, at the reception desk before you go through to the interview rooms. And you couldn't get moved. So people were beginning, I got the impression, people were beginning to become really worried, as we all were across the board, about infection and the risks to us. And whilst the government, I suppose, and the general public were just beginning to learn about how the pandemic really worked, we were just left high and dry. So that went on for quite a lengthy period of time. And you'll remember that then we had the summer and things kind of plateaued a bit and people relaxed a little bit. And then, of course, the winter hit and the figures went through the roof. And we had the Christmas and New Year break. Now, before Christmas and New Year, with the figures coming through, which were quite frightening, I had been saying, where are our protective measures? Where are the screens at the dock? Where can we safely interview clients? So we come back after Christmas and New Year, and it just so happened that I had the first trial, I think it was on the 5th of January at Livingston Sheriff Court. And I'd thought about it over the festive period, and I decided that I was just going to refuse to do it until a full and proper risk assessment had been carried out on the courtrooms, the building, before we spent hour after hour in a largely unventilated room at the height of a pandemic, running a summary trial. So I told the sheriff that on the 5th of January. And of course, whilst the sheriff had some sympathy, they had been told the courts were safe. Now, they had been told the courts were safe, as it turns out, based on a risk assessment that had been not individually carried out court to court, but had been carried out at the beginning of the pandemic in March. And we had different variants by that point, they're a rapid spreader. So I just said, no, I'm not doing it. This trial needs to be adjourned. And it just so transpired that there were witness difficulties on the part of the Crown, and the trial was adjourned. Lo and behold, on the 6th of January, who's got the trial? Me. I did exactly the same. And this time the sheriff agreed to adjourn it. Now, what happened shortly thereafter, within a space of days, because the media got hold of this, it was on Report in Scotland, it was in the papers, was that there was a secret meeting conducted with, as I understand it, Lord Carloway and the Justice Minister and top sheriff clerks. And it was that was on the Sunday, I think, the following Sunday. And as a consequence of that, they brought in the restrictions. But they still didn't bring in any protective measures. And it was some time thereafter that we saw any screens being introduced at court. So I suppose, having achieved that to an extent, gave me a bit of confidence. And I thought to myself, well, maybe given I am now a senior member of the Independent Criminal Bar, maybe I've got something to say. Maybe if I say something, then there will be consequences, things will change. So the Resilience Fund was announced, and come, I think, March, the decisions for the application process were being issued from the Legal Aid Board. And it quickly became apparent that we were, for want of a better description, being shafted again. That the magic formula that seems to have been applied, as we understood it by the Legal Aid Board, although if you ask them, as I did, they were pointing the finger at the government and vice versa, suggested that after everything that we had been through in the pandemic and everything that we had done to make sure that the criminal justice system proceeded and kept going, that it was claimed that we were profiting from the pandemic. Now, it was farcical. Shortly after the decision to refuse my application, for instance, my firm's application, suggesting that we were significantly profiting from COVID, or would significantly profit from COVID, we got our annual accounts out. And it was black and white, And I parked up in the car park at the office here, and I was just sick to the back teeth. So I launched into a diatribe on Twitter, directed at the then Justice Secretary, Humza Yousaf, which seemed to gain some traction in the profession, and then became adopted as the slogan, the "We Turned Up" slogan. And throughout this time, we were finding that the faculty was beginning to adopt a siege mentality, that defence solicitors across the country were all feeling, for want of a better word, scunnered. And we communicated a lot better. WhatsApp groups and such like, inter-faculty WhatsApp groups, to try and find out what was happening in other courts with COVID from the safety perspective, what was happening from a financial perspective. I mean, firms were really staring at the wall. And that enhanced communication then developed. I think you spoke to Julia previously. She'd mentioned that it organically developed into the SSBA. And I kind of organically became involved as a consequence of what had been happening. And I think the whole committee are pretty proud of what we've done so far. And the beauty of it is that we can do things that the Law Society can't. We've no restrictions. And that's demonstrated by the action that was taken earlier in the year, which produced pretty powerful images of empty gowns, the hashtag Gowns Down Monday. And it also put, I think, a bit more pressure on the government to revisit the Resilience Fund, which they renamed, but we were successful, along with the Law Society and other individual faculties, in securing the release of what was a fairly significant balance of the original promised fund. And that money is being paid now. Firms have been receiving money since last week. I believe quite a number of firms are receiving money today. So things can be achieved. And what I don't think we have appreciated properly over the past 20 years, because this is not a COVID problem, this is a generational problem, is that we've got more power than we could ever imagine. That the system depends on us. If we're not there, the system stops. And we need to make the justice partners aware of that and remind them of that at every opportunity. Diplomacy's got to be the first port of call, but the government and the Legal Aid Board need to be conscious of the fact that we can go that step further than the Law Society, and we will go that step further if it's necessary. We've got challenges ahead in terms of COP26. Courts running 7 days a week in Glasgow for, I think, 3 weeks on the bounce. Courts in Aberdeen and Edinburgh at the weekends. I believe Falkirk, Hamilton. So we need to ensure that we are properly remunerated for giving up our time. The work-life balance of the defence lawyer is so skewed as it is. They've already denied us public holidays. They were taken away from us without consultation. And now we find our weekends disappearing. And we are the only ones in that courtroom on that weekend who are not receiving some level of enhanced pay. So there are discussions ongoing about that. They need to continue, and they need to conclude satisfactorily from our perspective before COP26 in November.
I mean, thanks for that, rundown. And what you've narrated there is indicative of a massively challenging time for criminal defence practitioners within this system. Mm-hmm. And for example, you mentioned COP26. I mean, how is that practically meant to be covered by firms who just don't have the personnel? I mean, remuneration is a exceptionally important part of this, but there's actually the challenge of just physically being able to do the work, mm-hmm. With needing people to be able to do it.
Yeah, and the weekend courts is just a snapshot, because the RRT programme to recover from the pandemic is introducing additional trials courts across the country. And the profession is dying on its knees. We cannot find qualified members of staff to employ. If you put an advert out there, it's met with deathly silence. Conversely, if you advertise for a trainee, you receive a tsunami of applications. We have just finished interviewing for a trainee starting in October. We were fortunate enough to receive some of the funding from the traineeship programme, and I received 120 applications, of which I interviewed 10 for one position. And I'm hearing across the country that is just what everybody's receiving, over 100 applications. So you've got all these kids looking for a job, can't get a job. We need qualified staff now, and we're finding that we can't employ qualified staff because we're losing them to the Crown, hand over fist, because we can't compete with £45,000 starting salary. I mean, lucky if we can touch half of that. And I've lost 2 outstanding assistants to the fiscal service over the past few years, simply because we can't compete. The sad fact is that we take on trainees, we train them up, and then they jump the fence. So we're training lawyers for the Crown.
Which would be the fear factor around the 40 new trainees that are being covered by the grants that have come in. But, if retention is impossible, then essentially the problem isn't in any way solved.
No, it's not going away at all. We need to be in a position to financially compete with the Crown. I mean, how can we claim to have a fair country when our criminal justice system isn't fair? The scales of justice are so imbalanced, and they are clearly balanced in favour of the Crown with all their resources. They've had 3 rounds of intake over the past year. And I see on Twitter, and I hear from colleagues that on a weekly basis, almost, qualified staff are either going to the Crown or they're just leaving criminal defence entirely. Some of them are just leaving the law. So, as I said earlier, we may be the last of the dinosaurs, but something's got to give. Something's got to change. And with the new recovery programme, we are having to find ourselves in sometimes 3 or 4 different places at once, whereas before it was 2 or 3 different places at once. I mean, this job can be a racetrack to a heart attack.
And I'm sure the SSBA and others, the Law Society, are making this point to the powers that be around it needing to be a system. It's not a system to have remunerated fiscals with work-life balance and proper pay and all of that, and then not have that on the other side of the table. Is there, for those that aren't party to those discussions, what's said when these points are made?
Well, they're not said. That's the problem. We're not even in the room.
Okay.
We're the only ones that aren't in the room. Only now, in the past few days, have we been invited into the room, the SSBA. So you can't affect change if you're not there to ask for it, I suppose is the point. But this is another aspect of the SSBA is that our birth and now presence is being recognised, and we seem to be forcing ourselves into the consciousness of our justice partners to the extent whereby, as I say, we've received a recent invite. Because all these decisions that have been affecting us for years are made without any consultation whatsoever. There's a total disrespect for the independent criminal bar in this country. We are looked upon in the same way as our clients are looked upon. That's not being overly dramatic. That needs to change. As I say, it needs to be understood that we are an essential cog, and the system stops without us.
Yeah, and it's an essential cog, and it's also, with it being a system, it's a point I tried to make in years gone by. But a grant of legal aid to the accused is a grant to the system. It allows the system to work. Yes, the accused benefits from it directly with representation, but it means that the accused goes into court, is being guided by the solicitor, given advice. It means that the case can progress because the court can be advised of the state of preparation of the defence. It oils the system, and the system can only function when every single part of it actually works. And I think we've long had talk of the system being in crisis and it's going to fall apart and all of these things, but it does genuinely seem to be the case that we are reaching that point.
But this again, it's not been overly dramatic to say that this is a proper crisis, and it's not something that's snuck up on us. It's something that has built for years. I'm talking 20 plus years. The fixed fee, when it was brought in 1999, only now with the recent small percentage increases, equates to the fixed fee now. So in 1999, the fixed fee was the same as it is now. And if it had been index linked, it would be 50% higher. So you can't expect an independent criminal, a national independent criminal bar, to continue to survive when it's been ignored for that long. This job, remember, is very different to what it was in 1999. This job's a lot harder now. All the additional laws that have been brought in, all the hoops that you need to jump through in order to prepare a single case. Looking back in the 90s, the job was a scoosh compared to now. So things need to change. Bottom line. Yeah.
No, well, listen, Darryl, thank you for that. I mean, everything you say is eloquent of the need for change, the crisis that the system's currently facing, and hopefully the arguments can be articulated and listened to. Yeah.